All right, guys, we have breaking news. The NCAA case for the new implemented changes for the 25 class has been settled. The judge has agreed to the amended terms from the NCAA. We're going to head over to d1baseball.com. They have a great article describing, kind of breaking down the points of everything and how things are going to change, what it's going to look like, what the details are. We're going to go through that 1 to 12. They have 12 bullet points and give you kind of elite sports advising, our team's perspective, as well as kind of what D1 Baseball is saying. Again, if you guys are fans of college baseball, want to stay up to date with what's going on recruiting-wise, coaching-wise, and just in-season stuff, I highly recommend D1 Baseball. They do a great job. So we're going to go over here right now, and we're going to go through this one by one. At the top here, I told you guys, the judge agreed to the amended terms, so now everything is moving forward. So we're going to go through this one by one, and I'll give you kind of what I think and what our team thinks is going to be happening with these changes. So April 27th, 2025 will be a massive day for the future of college athletics and college baseball. In addition to instituting back pay to some athletes, unfortunately, I didn't play college baseball recently enough to get some of this back pay. Good for those guys that are getting some of that. Along with more than $20 billion in athlete revenue share over the next 10 years, the new roster and scholarship elements will go into effect immediately once this hearing is over. That means the new scholarships and roster rules in college baseball will 100% be in effect for the fall of 2025. So, what we told you guys over a month ago with this case being held up in court and how, coaches really didn't know how to operate because they're pretty sure it's going to go through. But if it doesn't, then that's going to create a lot of issues. It's going into effect now. And, the key things, 40-man roster down to 34. So something that we have to keep an eye on, and it may be clarified in the later parts of this article, is that fall roster going to be locked at 34, or are schools going to be able to bring in walk-on still above the roster limit? Every school in the country brings in more guys than they're allowed to have on their spring roster. And usually those are walk-ons that are given the chance to make the team before they have to kind of trim the roster down to the limits. And, and this is the thing, guys, I think there's a lot of talk on social media, how walk-ons, aren't that great. And, you don't have a great chance. And obviously there's some truth to that. I played with two guys who were 3-year starters, Daniel Spingola and Thomas Smith at Georgia Tech. They were legitimate walk-ons that ended up making our team. And like I said, were 3-year starters, really good players in the ACC. And so schools bring on walk-ons because you can't see everybody. You can't be sure about everybody. And so you have a kid that you think might have some talent. Sometimes you find diamonds in the rough. That's what coaches are going to be looking for clarification on. Do they have to have only 34 guys on the roster in the sprint in the fall? It's going to make it hard for inter squads. It's going to make it more difficult to do stuff like that. So that's what we're going to be looking to see if there's clarification. And the other key word is this, the scholarships that we'll get into here in number 2. So as you well know, my previous reporting on the topic, every sport in the NCAA hierarchy will essentially turn into an equivalency sport. That continues for baseball. Baseball, beginning in the fall of 2025, will have a 34-man roster, down from the current 40-man roster, and will have an allowable full scholarship amount of 34. So we talked about the 34, but the key word in this one is the allowable full scholarships. Guys, a lot of people out there saying, schools are going to have all full rides now. Not the case. I mean, the vast majority of schools, I don't think you're going to see really any school go to 34 right away. Even your SEC, your big ACC schools, Big 10, Big 12, et cetera, you're going to see go to like the mid-20s. You're not going to see maybe there's 1 or 2 that go all the whole distance, but the vast majority of the schools that can afford it in the Power 4 conferences, and maybe a few in the mid-major category like a Coastal Carolina or a Southern Miss, schools that really compete like a Power 4 school, will go to that mid-20s. The rest of the schools are probably not going to see any increase for now. And so number 3, do not expect many, if any, conferences to have 34 full scholarships right off the bat. Like I said, for instance, even a power conference like the SEC could end up allowing 22 to 24 scholarships instead of a roster of everyone on full rides, mid-20s. There are conferences that reportedly could allow each program in their conference to do what they want, essentially. So the conferences have a lot of rights in these new rules, and they basically can set the allowable amount. Like they could say, the SEC could say the max amount you can give is 26 right now, and nobody can go over that. Or they can say, you guys are free to do whatever you want. So LSU could maybe go to 34. And, some of the other SEC schools would go to 22 or 24, but they're not limited on how much they can do. So the conferences have the rights to basically set the limit, or they can say free reign, do whatever you want. That's important to see how competitive balance works with these new rules. Remember, whatever your scholarship total is, those scholarships can be spread out over 34 players, not plays. So if you have 18 scholarships, those 18 scholarships can be spread out over the entire roster. Those 18 scholarships do not have to only apply to 18 specific players. So this is how it's always worked, guys. Even with 11.7 scholarships, you always tried to spread out the scholarships as best you could to land as many players. If you give 11 full rides out to players, well, that means you got to fill a whole entire roster of guys with not getting any athletic money. You're not going to do that great. So, my situation, when I went to Georgia Tech, I was offered a 25% athletic scholarship with the in-state Hope Scholarship. I basically had a full ride going into my freshman year. And then once I had a great freshman year and, the coaches saw me as a guy who's going to be a starter for the rest of my career, they bumped that from 25 to 50%. And so what coaches have always done is, try to attract as many guys in that recruiting class by spreading it out as best they can. And then once they identify, the guys that are going to be in the starting lineup for the next year or two, they try to buff those guys up a little bit. And what that means is from bench players, they're going to be taking a little bit, maybe taking a whole, whatever percentage they have left. If they're not seen as a guy that's really going to be competing on the field, it doesn't make sense to have any scholarship invested in them, especially when you only have 11.7. Now, what's great is, let's say a school goes to 17 full rides. Well, now you can give everybody 50%. So you're still going to be able to attract a lot of players with just 17 full rides. And I think a lot of schools, what you're going to see is, especially in the Power Four, try to get to that 17 mark or a little bit higher, because then you can give every player 50%. Or you can hand out a few full rides to really good players, the studs that you think are for sure starters as freshmen out the gate, and then spread the rest out to guys that you may think, they have a chance of making the starting lineup, but they're probably going to be, a platoon type player or a guy who comes off the bench that may have a chance his sophomore year. So that's important for you guys to understand. These new guidelines will essentially render walk-on programs at some college baseball programs void. If you have a roster of 34 players and 24 scholarships, chances are good you will distribute that money over 34 players. Also, with rosters trimming from 40 to 34, the ability for a walk-on to make a competitive roster dwindles. This is true. And this is what I have to say about it. Again, there's no clarification in this point if the fall rosters are going to be locked at 34. If that's the case, there's going to be none. I mean, you're virtually going to have none that are a legit walk-on, not a preferred walk-on. Remember, a preferred walk-on is a guy who's got a guaranteed roster spot. Walk-ons are guys that you don't have a guaranteed spot. I mean, you're trying out to make the team. You're basically, a lot of times are given the fall to impress the coaches enough to give you a spot on the roster. But this is the thing. If that roster is not capped at 34, schools, I would know if I would ever advise someone to just go and hopefully be a walk-on. It would have to be a case where I think the player is a lot better than maybe some coaches that have not made a move on him. Or if the player is really sold on going to school and doesn't want to go to a different one, says, I'm going to try to walk on. If I don't make it, fine. Again, I don't advise that. But the thing is this, coaches don't care how much money they have invested in a player. They want the best players on the team. So if a walk-on comes in, if they're allowed to have more than 34 guys and a walk-on comes in and he's definitely better than some of the guys that would make the roster, he's going to have a spot. So is it going to dwindle the walk-on programs? For sure. But we have to know if the 34-man roster is capped in the fall. If that's something that you can't go over, then there's going to be no walk-ons at all. Number 6, the new guidelines will also void the 25% scholarship minimum rule. That requirement was already on its way out in the near future, but this legislation and settlement accelerates its removal from the recruiting and scholarship allocation process. So, guys, we've had these changes happen in the last decade a few times where you were allowed to give a 1% scholarship, and then you had to give a 25% scholarship minimum, and then that's changed back and forth a few times. So now you no longer have to give 25%. You no longer have to give a minimum of 25%. It just gives coaches more flexibility. It's a little bit weird because now scholarships are going up, but this is going to help those mid-majors and lower tier D1s, even some of the Power Four that aren't going to have a lot of scholarship increase. Now they can spread out the money a little bit better. And I think this is to help those schools in competitive balance, because if they had to give a 25% scholarship minimum, they're not going to be able to be as flexible as possible in recruiting players. So if you can give a 10% scholarship out to a kid whose family's got a lot of money and they don't really need the scholarship versus saving that 15% for another kid that family really needs it, now you have that flexibility to do it. It's going to help schools that don't have big increases in scholarships right away compete. And again, I do think in the future, you're going to see schools from, especially in the Power Four, go from 22, 24. After a year or two, you may see them bump up close to 30. And then who knows, in 3 or 4 years, maybe even next year, you could see them go to that 34. But it's going to have to take some flexibility from the athletic departments. Number 7, I would expect many conferences to decide how many scholarships they will allow for baseball to come sometime in the next few weeks leading up to the early signing period in November. A decision date later than this would come as a surprise per multiple sources. So this is the thing, guys. What you got to remember is we have National Signing Day coming up in November for the 25 class. So now that these rules have gone into effect, conferences have to, basically it may be a mad dash if all of a sudden a school's like, oh, well, we can give more scholarships than we thought we were going to be able to give. And so that decision probably needs to be made quickly so schools can make some adjustments before that National Signing Day comes about. And so that makes total sense, but we'll have to see kind of how that develops over the next few weeks to see if they actually do make that decision. 8, something to remember about the current landscape of college athletics and scholarship allocation is the cost of an actual scholarship. For instance, many schools nationwide could simply stack financial and academic aid on top of the actual scholarship cost, essentially allowing certain programs to get closer to the full scholarship threshold for 34 players. There are plenty of ways to stack and stretch out those scholarship amounts. Look for programs to get super creative. I think everyone's kind of known this. I mean, schools have always tried to be creative with how much money they can give, academic, financial, and everything like that. But, this is nothing really new. They've always tried to do that. But the question is, are they going to be able to be more creative with more athletic money? That's what everyone's kind of waiting to see. And I think we kind of know how they're going to operate right now. So not much there, I don't think. 9, for now, no guideline is set for when a team must be at 34-man roster. Okay. However, the chances of that date being right before the season are very, very slim per sources. It's more likely that the programs will have to set their 34-man roster going into the fall or at a new arbitrary date in the middle of the fall. That will be quite a change for programs that are routinely bringing in 50 to 55 players in the fall. As one rising mid-major head coach told me earlier this year, we're about to find out who the real evaluators are in our business. 100%. Quote is unbelievable. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of big programs, it's everyone knows, but they bring in so many guys. Well, of course, you're going to find, if you bring in 55 guys, you're going to have a good team, especially the programs that can do that. I do think the best case scenario is at least they make this date in the middle of the fall, because then you can bring in a few extra walk-ons. You're not going to bring in a bunch like, they have in the past, but that gives you the ability to bring on some walk-ons and maybe find some diamonds in the rough. And so this is going to make it, again, like this mid-major coach said, the schools that are winning consistently, guys, they have the best evaluators. I mean, there's a few variables to this equation, but if you're not getting good players, if you're recruiting based on a perfect game rank, you're going to get found out. And evaluators, the best evaluators that we talk to with Elite Sports Advising, when we're talking about our clients, they're not waiting to make a decision based on, well, who else is on them. I mean, that is a key indicator that a coach is not confident in his own evaluation process. If you think you know what you're looking at and you're not worried about, and you think you're a good evaluator, you're not first asking, hey, who else is on him? Because that means you're trying to get, confirmation bias from other sources in the industry. Oh, well, these schools like him, so, okay, he must be good. It's like you should be able to make that determination yourself. And if you watch the player enough, you should be able to make that decision. So I think this mid-major coach is 100% right. This limit of rosters below the schools that are going to be able to offer a lot of scholarships, right? Because if you're an elite school, you're going to be elite players are going to want to go there and you're going to have money to do it. But that, once you get out of that top 10, 15 schools, The best evaluators are going to have the most success. Number 10, there will be a revenue sharing component that will go directly into college baseball or directly to college baseball student athletes. However, that amount is still to be determined, and no one in the industry expects college baseball to get a significant financial windfall via that avenue. There are Title IX implications to the revenue sharing process, so though there's a lot of money present, it must get stretched out to many programs. This is particularly interesting for the Big Ten Conference, which has a robust number of sports compared to some schools in the ACC, SEC, Big 12, and more. Not much to see here. I mean, we know that there's going to be the revenue share because of this, but really what they're saying is we're not exactly sure how much percentage of that college baseball is going to get because of Title IX. It's got to be shared to, female sports, like softball, in regards to baseball. So we're not really going to see what the impact of that is going to be for, until we really go through this for a couple of years. 11, Division I athletic programs will have the ability to opt out of the NCAA's landmark settlement. That could mean that those particular athletic departments no longer have the ability to play baseball in Division I. For instance, the other implication is how many opt-in schools will play those opt-out schools in competition. Time will tell. So this is something we were hearing over the last couple months from schools, especially in the lower level D1s and the mid majors, is that their conference and their school may be able to opt out of this settlement. And not have to go to 34, you get stay at 40. The question is, if you're playing in Division I NCAA and you have a different rule set than other schools, how does that work? Are you able to, can you still play schools that are opting into the settlement? That's something that needs to be cleared up. And, we should be getting clarification on that, obviously as soon as possible, but before baseball starts, but we'll have to wait and see. Because this is something that's really going to affect college baseball if a lot of schools at the Division I level try to opt out. So we'll have to wait and see. Number 12, and lastly, the new roster and scholarship rules very much diminish power conference recruiting in the high school ranks. If head coaches only have 34 roster spots in the SEC, Big 12, or ACC, for instance, they are much more likely to hit the transfer portal for more proven commodities given the premium on roster spots. Excuse me. The margin for error is very small. What's the fallout from that? Look for mid-major programs to start stacking more premium level talent out of the high school ranks. Of course, that also means the mid-major programs will have to find ways in the future to keep those same kids out of the transfer portal. There's a definite trickle-down effect present. Yeah, and this is something that I've actually started calling, college baseball trickle-down. Because of these changes, one of the things I said was when this goes down, you're going to see that trickle-down of high-level high school recruits going down to lower levels, at the mid-major, which still is unbelievably talented baseball. But we've seen that in the last couple months, guys. What was one of the things that I predicted would happen? We predicted that there would be mass decommits. And, I think we probably predicted that really at the end of July. And you guys have seen social media. School after school after school has 7, 8, 9 decommits, where they're doing that because they just don't have the roster spots. And I think what they're saying here is exactly right. You're still going to see the Power 4 schools go after the premium high school talent. I'll say it like this. I talked to a Power 4 coach a few weeks ago, and he basically said, we're only offering guys right now that are, Team USA type guys that are draft potential prospects that we think have a chance of sliding and not going. We're not going to move on the guys that we don't think are top tier right now, because with these roster changes, like they said, there's less spots. So you're not going to bring in as many high school guys. What you're going to see, and this is what I predict, you're going to see more of the premium high school arms going to Power 4s. And you're going to see less of the premium position players, at least at what they're thought of at the high school level. Because again, much easier to project out what a pitcher is going to be able to do at the college level. Much easier. It's much harder to project, okay, this position player is ranked. I mean, guys, I came into Georgia Tech, like I said in the past, like number 21 of 22 in my recruiting class. There were so many position players ranked ahead of me. And at the end of the day, 5 or 6 of those guys were starters on our team. So that means 10 guys weren't, guys that sat the bench or had to transfer out. Position players are just harder to project because they don't face the type of arm talent day by day that you do in the ACC, Big 12, SEC, etc. You're facing guys that are consistently throwing over 90, and they're not touching 90, and that's a big compare. Well, most guys say, well, I face guys that hit 90 all the time. It's like, so a guy that hits 90 in a game means he's consistently throwing at about 86, 88, and maybe he'll top a 90. That's totally different than a guy that's sitting 90, 91 and touching a 93 or 94. That's totally different. It looks totally different at the plate. So that's the biggest difference. And so position players, it's a much bigger learning curve. I do think the learning curve for pitchers has gone up with the shortening of the strike zone, or the tightening of the strike zone, and the way the balls are just flying with the bats and the balls in college baseball now. It used to be you had really good stuff as a pitcher going into college baseball, especially when I played from 2011 to 2013, when the balls were dead, the bats were changed, so they were dead. If you had good stuff, you're gonna be a good pitcher in college baseball. Now you have to be a little bit more advanced and developed. But look for those changes, guys. I hope this helps, guys. Again, we're going to keep you guys updated with as things continue to develop with some of these things that are mentioned here. Don't hesitate to send me questions with what you're thinking when it comes to this. We're going to post this on YouTube, on X, everything. So put in the comments what you're thinking, what your thoughts are. We'll do my best to answer all your questions. Thanks for all the support, guys. Again, if you're looking for help in the recruiting process, go to our website, elitesportsadvising.com. Fill out an eval request. We'll send that to one of our regional advisors who will meet with you, discuss where they think you could potentially get to if you put the work in, and see if it's a fit. Thanks a lot, guys, and we'll be back with another video.